Hello and welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. I'm your host, Greg Elfring, the head of marketing over here at Empire Flippers, and today I am talking to Nancy Harhut. She is the founder of her own agency, and she wrote the book all about neuromarketing, which is combining behavioral psychology with marketing. You'll probably notice I get pretty into this because I love this stuff. I was telling Nancy right after the end of the podcast that this is the type of stuff that got me originally really fascinated by marketing, this interesting cross section of psychology, economics, and art to all combine to get someone to move, to make a decision. And Nancy's been in the trenches with this stuff for a very, very long time. This is actually our second time on this podcast. So if you like this episode, definitely go into the vaults of Greg of Yore and watch the first episode. But for the first half of this, we're just talking a lot about behavioral psychology and my own pet theory on liminal spaces as far as these indecision hallways that people make to make a decision to buy something. But then we go into a pretty interesting discussion on AI. And it was funny because we were talking about transitional spaces, and she mentioned we're kind of in this massive transitional space right now, and which I agree. We don't know where things are going to end up. But if you are using AI in your content creation workflow, nothing wrong with that. But you should definitely listen to at least the second half of this podcast, especially if you're targeting tech savvy people like Nancy or me, people that are in this stuff day to day. If that's kind of your target market, is those type of people, you'll definitely want to hear what Nancy and I have to say about AI content. It has nothing to do with search rankings, nothing to do with any of that, but the actual emotional factor that goes into getting someone to purchase your product or service. So with that said, I'll get off my soapbox and I'll see you on the other side. By the way, if you like The Office, it's not done yet, but leave a comment down below. I've been spending a lot of time trying to get this office to be in tip-top shape. So anyways, we'll get into the podcast now. Talk to you soon. All right. Welcome to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. And today I am speaking with an old guest of this podcast, Nancy Harhut. So, Nancy, I think we were talking a little bit offline. It's probably been over 3 years since last you were on, but for anyone who hasn't watched it, I recommend go watch that podcast I did with you. We had an awesome conversation about behavioral marketing and neuroscience, and we're going to do it again. But for my friends out there listening in who doesn't know who you are, maybe tell us what you do, where you're at in the world, and maybe an update since last time we chatted.
Sure. So I remain interested in behavioral science and neuroscience, no problem. That hasn't changed, but I continue to run HBT Marketing. I co-founded this agency, and it focuses on applying behavioral science to marketing best practices in order to increase response, email, direct mail, landing pages, what have you. I authored the book Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. It continues to sell well, so I've got that going. And basically, I'm just, I just kind of nerd out on how to use behavioral science and marketing. And when we talk about behavioral science and marketing, what we're really talking about is the decision-making shortcuts that everybody relies on to just kind of make it through the day. And as marketers, as brands become savvy to this, it allows us to, craft our messages in a way that are more likely to be noticed, to be understood, to be remembered, and to be acted upon. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, a lot has changed since last time we chatted. I think the last time we were talking, AI was not nearly as mainstream. I don't even think ChatGPT was out yet. And obviously, that is having a massive impact on everything, which I think will probably dominate a lot of our conversation, what that impact looks like. But before we go further, a lot of my audience, they're like SEOs, they're technical marketers, entrepreneurs just trying to figure out how to make a paid ad campaign work. So they might think neuromarketing, this sounds super abstract. Why am I doing anything with this? Maybe we can talk a little bit about what that is and how your practice leads to real practical results for people out there in the trenches. What is neuromarketing? What is this behavioral science stuff?
Yeah, that's a great place to start, actually, because people hear science and they think about white lab coats and test tubes, and they immediately go, "That is not for me," or neuroscience. That's even worse. Their eyes just roll back in their head, And I don't mean to minimize things, but for the purposes of our conversation, what we're really talking about is how people make decisions, why they do what they do, and perhaps more important, how we can get them to make more of the decisions we want them to make. And the truth of the matter is, humans have developed these automatic, instinctive reflexive behaviors, these hardwired behaviors. And it's happened over the ages simply as a way to conserve mental energy. Because if we had to weigh every bit of information before we made a decision, we'd never get around to making any decisions. So as a species, we have developed these hardwired behaviors. And for the most part, we cruise along on autopilot. And when we encounter a certain situation, we just default to these hardwired behaviors, giving the matter little, if any, thought. And I'm not saying that we never put on our thinking caps and weigh the pros and cons and do the cost benefit analysis, but very often we're just responding in the moment based on these hardwired behaviors that have served humanity well, over the ages. And we, just default to them. Sometimes we're aware of it. A lot of times we're not. And so what we're really talking about, at the essence here is why people do what they do, how they behave, and more importantly, how an entrepreneur, how a business, how a brand can influence those behaviors. We can't wave a magic wand. We can't make 100% of the people do 100% of what we want 100% of the time, but we can increase our chances by working with the human brain and not against it. Too often we feel that people make these well thought out, well considered decisions. They deliberate. We think they spend as much time with the content and the marketing messages we put out there, as we spend creating them. And that's simply not true. Their attention is scattered. They're skimming and scanning. Something happens to interest them, and maybe they go in and more further absorb or consume the information. But it's really important for us to realize, how the brain works and how our customers and prospects are consuming information so that we have the best chance of delivering the message that we want to deliver and influencing the behavior that we're looking to influence. So it's really that simple. It's not the white coats and the test tubes. And, it's just really what decision-making shortcuts do people use? And if we know they use them, how do we tee them up so that we're more likely to get the response we're looking for?
A lot to unpack there. I think that's great. First of all, I would say from one marketer to another, we can do anything we want. That's why the FTC sues us all the time, right? I'm kidding. Don't, joking. No one does do that. But second of all, like a lot of this stuff I find so fascinating, especially where we're at with technology right now. But like, the whole idea of pain versus pleasure. How does someone move? They tend to move to get away from pain rather than move towards pleasure. It reminds me of the old thought of like type A, type B thinking, like you're out in the jungle, you hear a leaf rustle, and you think it's a tiger. Now, most of the time, it's not a tiger, but we've been trained that it's much better to think it's a tiger than to think it's just the leaves rustling, right? So that's a very subtle thing that is just like baked into us that we never think about, we never bring out into marketing. So before we get into all the craziness that's happening in the marketing world at the moment, which I'm sure there's a ton we could talk about, maybe you could share some practical examples from your own work of like how this has played out in a few campaigns of like twisting these little genetic imprints that we have, if you will, of how we do things, right? Like how has this played out for you in campaigns before?
Yeah. So, you're talking a little bit about loss aversion, right? Like
Yes.
we move, towards pleasure away from pain. We're really moving away from pain is what we're trying to do, right? So people are twice as motivated to avoid the pain of loss as they are to achieve the pleasure of gain. And that can be kind of a counterintuitive fact for a marketer, because in marketing, we emphasize the gains, the advantages, the benefits, right? All the wonderful stuff that'll happen, all the great things that'll come to you if you just say yes, if you just, answer my email, or if you just click on this button, if you just go to my e-commerce site and make a purchase, right? And it's true. All this wonderful stuff will happen. And we do have to tell
Absolutely.
people.
No asterisks.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I mean, like I don't want your listeners to say, "Oh, Nancy said we don't need to talk about our benefits anymore." No, of course we do.
Your life is horrible as you find this right now. It's going to get worse if you don't find this.
Honestly, it's like we want to talk about the benefits, but we want to weave in a little of that, that loss aversion,
Yeah.
because behavioral scientists have proven that people are, twice as motivated to avoid that pain of loss. So I was working on a campaign. It was an email campaign for a client of mine, and we were trying to get people to save more money for retirement. So right away, that's tough because there's something that behavioral scientists refer to as present focus bias. Like we love to have instant gratification. So when a marketer is selling something that offers instant gratification, great, but when you're selling something where the reward is down the road, it could be exercise equipment, it could be saving for retirement, it could be going back to school, any number of things where the payoff comes later. It's a little tougher because the natural human inclination is to take that $100 in our hot little hand and go buy, a dinner and a movie ticket, right? As opposed to putting it aside for that thing that's going to pay off later. And so we're trying to get people to save more for retirement. So we tried a few different approaches, and one of them was the idea of loss aversion, and it was centered around the mistakes people make when they're thinking about saving for retirement. Because a mistake would represent a loss, right? Like we all want to avoid mistakes. We all don't want to, have that same misstep that somebody else made. And so if you can kind of tee into what somebody else did wrong, then you're going to make sure that you don't do it. So the difference between saying, here are some great tips that you should use to save for your retirement versus here are the mistakes that people commonly make was big, right? And people went for the idea of the mistakes, So that's a practical example of how you can use this idea of loss aversion in marketing. There's another tactic that behavioral scientists talk about. It's called the reciprocity principle. It's this idea that if somebody does something for you, you like to return the favor. You like to answer in kind. And again, this goes all the way back to our ancient ancestors, the same ones who, if they heard that, rustle in the leaves, thought could be danger, right? Those same ones were really kind of programmed to reciprocate because you kind of traveled in a tribe or a clan or a group, right? You had the small unit. And if you didn't kind of, you know, reciprocate, if you didn't shoulder your portion of the responsibilities, if you were just a freeloader, right? You take, and never give, they would ostracize you. Eventually, they'd kick you out of the group. And back then, you had virtually no chance of surviving, right? So, this idea of reciprocity is just, it's embedded in us now. It's part of our DNA. So, I was doing some work for a client, and this was a B2B example. They were targeting financial advisors who had stopped selling their funds, and they couldn't figure out why the financial advisors had stopped selling their funds. And they were emailing them and calling them and trying to reactivate them. And now a year had passed, and there was still a chunk of them that they had not been able to reactivate. So they came to the agency and they said, can you help us? Can you figure out some kind of a marketing campaign that might get these, independent financial advisors to start selling our product again? And we sent them an email that said, hey, watch your US mail. You're going to be receiving a gift that we picked out especially for you. And then a couple of days later, this white corrugated box appears, and there's this framed New Yorker cartoon in it. And the cartoon is, appropriate for someone who's in financial services. The caption of the cartoon is not only amusing, but it includes the individual recipient's name. So Greg yours would say Greg, mine would say Nancy. Really kind of cool. There was a, little blurb about the New Yorker artist, because New Yorker artists are kind of prestigious, right? And then there was a short letter that said, hey, we really miss you. A lot's been happening since the last we did business. Here are a few business building tips that might help you, and we'd love to be in touch. They reported to us that they generated $68 million in incremental revenue off that campaign. $68 million that they would not have realized had they not used this reciprocity campaign to reactivate people. I mean, these financial advisors left. They were gone for a year, maybe more. They'd made their decision. Now, they didn't ask for a gift, obviously, but they were sent one, and now you've got it. It's hanging on your wall or sitting on your desk, and it's kind of hard not to do a little something back to try to even the score, right? To the tune of 68 million. So there's an example of the reciprocity principle in action.
I love that. It reminds me a bit of, content marketing 101. The way I always describe content marketing is you give someone something that's so valuable that they can like consume the content and they don't need to hire you to do the thing because you've been so detailed, but their reaction is like, wow, that was amazing. This seems like a ton of work. Could you do it for me? Right. Because you give like, here's all the keys to the castle. Like, well, maybe I'm not the right guy to open the door. Maybe you seem to know what you're talking about there. Right. But you're educating them. So it's kind of like a gift as well. I love the cartoon thing. There's a book I read, I think it's called How to Meet Anyone or Get a Meeting with Anyone. And it was like from a former cartoonist, I think a New York cartoonist, if I'm not mistaken, who that was his whole thing. He just like send like weird cartoons to like random influential people. And you could get a meeting with like anyone because it's so strange. Like no one does this. I think one time he like sent a giant like cardboard cutout action figure of the CEO. That's like a joke. And like the gatekeeper, like, oh, I don't know what this is. Like here, it was just like so massive. It got him curious to open it up. Right. I love little stuff like that. So we mentioned loss aversion. We mentioned reciprocity, which I can never pronounce correctly. What are some of the other, like, say, one or two big ones in behavioral marketing that people should be thinking about?
Sure. Well, actually, I'm going to give you a couple of newer ones that I've come across, and they're not
Oh, okay.
they're not huge, but I think they can have a huge impact. So one of them is called the time description effect. And I thought this was really interesting. So basically, this was reported in the Journal of Applied Science. I think they ran 10 different studies and then they reported on the studies. And what they found was When you describe a deadline in terms of a duration versus the actual date, you're much more likely to get people to start to take action. So what do I mean by that? So if I said to you, you know, Greg, I need your response by next Friday, you're much more likely to do it than if I said, Greg, I need your response by, April 10th. I'm not even sure what next Friday is, but you know what I mean? The date, but that's actually the whole point, right? It's like,
Yeah,
if I give
yeah,
you the date, you have to think, okay, what's today's date? All right, how many days from today's date is April 10th, versus if I say to you, hey, listen, it's due next Friday, you're like, I got it. Like, it's a whole lot easier to calculate when next Friday is, the duration, right, than it is the actual date. And I thought that is massive, because so often we do have deadlines. We have these special offers, we have, expiration dates, and of course we remind people, we tell people what they are, and then we remind them. And maybe legally we have to have the actual date. I totally accept that. But then pair the two, say it's due next Friday, April 10th, as opposed to, April 10th, or it expires
yeah,
April 10th, or you have to enter by April 10th, like give that the day as well as the date, because the duration is just so much easier for people to process. And in all 10 of these studies, people were much more likely to take the action. So I thought that was pretty interesting. I literally just read about that, in the last several months. And I thought that's something I want to start sharing when I speak at conferences, and certainly, when I'm working with clients, because it's a small change that could have a big impact. So I like that one a lot. And then there's one that I don't think we've discussed before, called autonomy bias. And it's this deep-seated desire that everybody has to exert some kind of control, right, over themselves, over their environment. Essentially, nobody likes to feel like they're being pushed into doing something. Nobody likes to feel like they're being backed into a corner. No one likes their autonomy taken from them. We all like to feel like we're calling the shots, we're the ones in charge, we're the ones who are making the decisions. And an easy way to make people feel that, this deep-seated desire to be autonomous, is to give them a choice. And a lot of times in marketing, we think people are so busy and we're supposed to be the experts. So we are going to tell you this. This is the perfect product for you. This is the perfect service for you. This is tailored for you. Of all the other ones out there, of all the other ones we offer, this is the one. We're going to make that recommendation. And we think we're doing a service. We think that we're saving people time. We think that we're being helpful. But it turns out that giving people a choice can be the thing that we want to do. Because when people have a choice, they feel like, they've got some autonomy. If I say, here it is, do you want it? Well, you have to decide. I don't know. Do I not want it? And so what do? You go, well, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to sleep on it. I'm going to do some research. I'm going to ask my colleagues. I'm going to ask my, buddies when we're on the golf course or when we're out for a drink. And then life gets in the way and we don't do the research. We don't remember to ask our buddies, and the buying moment disappears. But when you give somebody two options and you say, you can have this one or this one, the question goes from, do I or do I not want this, to, oh, which of these two do I want? And which of these two do I want is a lot easier to answer than, do I or do I not want this, right? It's like, oh, I have two to compare. There's context, there's comparison. It's just between these two, which is the better. And researchers have found that it can actually double the likelihood that people will make that buying decision in the moment, just by, giving the choice. Now, as I say this, Greg, you might say, well, Nancy, you said, which of these two? Let's not stop at two. Let's give them 10. Let's give them 20, And of course, we don't want to do that, right? Everyone's going to be like, oh, I'm loving all these options. But then analysis paralysis sets in, right?
yeah.
They can't decide, or they make a choice, but they're haunted by this idea that maybe they didn't make the right one. Maybe they left something better on the table.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
right. So two is usually better than one. Three can be the magic number. Anything beyond three, four, five, I would say start chunking. If you really have that many options and people have to work their way through them, chunk them out. What do I mean by chunking? We're selling candy. We have 100 different varieties. All right, let's start with, do you want hard candy or chocolate? Oh, you want chocolate. Okay, great. Now, do you want milk chocolate or do you want dark chocolate? Dark. Okay. 85%. 50%, 15%, cocoa. So you kind of chunk the decisions or the choices and make them easy. But this idea of giving people a choice, this idea of autonomy, it runs a little counter maybe to having that perfectly tailored solution that we're offering somebody, but it actually can, on average, increase the likelihood that people will make the buying decision in the moment. And that's pretty incredible. There's a corollary to it called the BYAF technique, but you were free. And what researchers have found is you can tell someone what you want them to do, you can ask them to do it, but if you follow the request, but with a phrase like, but you are free to choose, or but the choice is yours, or it's up to you, or it's your call, that increases the likelihood people will make the decision you want because you're making it really top of mind that it's their decision. You're not pushing them into it. They have free will. They're coming to the decision of their own volition. So, pretty interesting stuff, I think, just in terms of little things that we can do to work with the brain and not against it.
You bring this up, it makes me want to ask. This might be new to you. It's new to me. You're much more in depth with this stuff than I am. But are you familiar with the decoy effect strategy?
I am, yes, yes. But
Yeah.
let's talk about it because I find it fascinating. And I think your listeners are going to be like, whoa.
So you can correct me if I'm getting this wrong, but I've been thinking about starting a YouTube channel on like marketing education with like this like edginess to it, kind of like a Black Mirror thing for fun. It's like a storytelling channel, but educational as well. But I came across the decoy effect, and I thought it was very funny because the story that I read about it was from The Economist. They were trying to sell like their digital and print magazines, like early 2000s, I think, together. And they had three choices. So just print, just digital, or both. And the both was like super expensive versus just getting the digital. And most people just went with the digital because it's cheaper than the print. But then what they decided to do was to increase the price of the print and then make it the same price as if you chose the digital and the print option together. So now you have these two options where it's just the print for the exact same price of getting the digital and print, or you can just get the digital. So most people are like, economists, you guys are pretty dumb. Of course, I'm going to take the digital and print offer. But that was the whole point. They like set that up as a decoy to get you to actually select the thing you wanted. So that's how I learned about it. But you probably know way more about it. I don't know if I did a good job describing that or not.
Oh,
But
no, I mean, I
tell
think
me more.
that was like the definitive study, but you're absolutely right. It's like, if you can have the cheap one or the more expensive one, more people take the cheap one. But when they were like, well, you can have, these two together for the price of one, it's like, what do you think I am, an idiot? Of course I'm going to take the combo for the same price as the single. It's amazing. And so, the thinking there is create a decoy and, you can either have you can have your basic, your deluxe, and then you could create a super deluxe, which has a few more bells and whistles, but is kind of a lot more expensive. And that pushes people to that middle option, which used to be your high end option. When you had the super deluxe pushes you to the deluxe, but when you only had, basic and deluxe, more people would go for the basic. Or you can make your decoy the middle option. For example, you go to the movies and a bucket of popcorn, the small is 3, the medium is 6, and then the large is only 7.50, and you're like, wait a minute, the difference between the small and the medium is $3, but the difference between the medium and the large is only a buck and a half more. That's a better deal. I'm going to go with that. I was actually on vacation in Cancun, and I'm looking at the menu, and everything's in, I don't know, pesos, I guess, right, in Mexico. But I got it. I'm like, they had the small pina colada, the medium pina colada, and the grande pina colada. And, you were definitely like, when you look, you're like, I'm totally doing the biggest one they have because it's only, 50 pence more or something. And of course, then you see the waiters going by with all of them, which gives you some social proof on top of it because you're thinking everyone else is ordering the big ones too. When I looked at the menu, I'm like, oh my gosh, this like little restaurant. I don't think I'm sure it's not a chain. I think it's this one guy. He's got a great following and, here he's doing it. Whether he stumbled on it, whether, he did it instinctively, whether someone told him, I don't know. But it was a great example. But, we can manipulate is actually the wrong word. But by changing, how we price things or how many things we offer, it can influence the decisions people make. I mean, if you went in there and all you wanted was a small, that was absolutely what you were wed to, probably no amount of advertising is going to change your mind. But if you went in and you sit down and like, okay, which I think I feel like popcorn here at the movies, or I think I feel like a pina colada here at the restaurant, and you didn't already know exactly what size you wanted, you are influenced by these things. So the idea of decoy pricing is really pretty fascinating. You would think, really, and yet it absolutely works.
I love stuff like that. We could probably trade stories back and forth. But before I get into the AI thing, I do have a pet theory in my mind. And I'm curious how well it aligns with like your knowledge of behavioral science and behavioral marketing. Are you familiar with the concept of liminal spaces?
I don't think I am. What was that again?
So
Liminal
liminal spaces.
liminal spaces. No, hit me up. Okay.
This is a sign that I'm terminally online because I love like creepy pasta horror stories. But there's this whole creepy pasta called The Back Rooms where you glitch out of reality. You're in this like office, like endless office maze. and it popularized the whole idea of liminal spaces and a lot of like internet storytelling culture. But basically, what a liminal space is, like, say you're at a hotel, you're in your hotel room, you open up the door, now you're in the hotel hallway to go to the elevator, go down the lobby, right? Well, that hallway is a liminal space. It's designed as a space for transition. You're not supposed to stay in it. You're just in this hallway, and the whole goal of the hallway is to get to the elevator and get back to your hotel room, right? So my pet theory is I'm like combining these different things and think, like, I often think of marketing through storytelling. So I often take like what storytellers are talking about and try to apply it to marketing. So my pet theory is that so much of marketing is trying to get someone out of their hotel room and into the hallway. And once they're in the hallway, now they're in this place of indecision because there's a liminal space. They have to make a decision on which way they're going, what they're going to do. And all the doors and the elevators, all this stuff is all the different advertisements, all the different decision trees. And the longer someone stays in this state of indecision, the more likely they'll go through a certain door that they may never have thought they would go through that door. And it's something I've been thinking about, even since like post pandemic, like, we all have friends who went down the conspiracy theories or whatever, right? As they're like locked up, going a little bit nuts. And I view that as like the super long liminal space that they were in. And because they were in such a long liminal space, this like space of indecision, now they can transition into ways that they never could. Like, if you look at belief as kind of a three-tier system, right? Where like tertiary beliefs is the weather is rainy outside, but you can point to the sun, like clearly it's not. Now it changes your belief. A secondary belief might be something like, I don't know, your political beliefs, and your first belief is like your religious beliefs. Like very, very hard to change this as you go up to your like primary belief system. But if you stay in this liminal space long enough where you're in this perpetual state of, long indecision, then it becomes easier in a sense to change what used to be very permanent because you want to get out of this liminal space. So you've got to make the decision, right? So I think about it a lot with like ADA, right? Attention, interest, desire, or like poking the bear kind of thing, right? Like, oh yeah, you definitely want to eat this chocolate bar because you have low energy. Like you'll have more energy if you do it, right? You like so much of marketing is like pushing someone into a liminal space to get them to be open to make a decision. Does that make sense with what I'm saying? Does that track at all with behavioral marketing in your experience?
Yeah, it does actually. I think that, you're in the hallway, you could argue you're in a period of disequilibrium, right? You're not in your room,
Yeah.
nor you're in the elevator. You're kind of and you're maybe more likely to make some kind of a decision in that period of disequilibrium. You're maybe more likely to be influenced. Behavioral scientists talk about something called the fresh start effect, actually. And what they've identified is these transition periods that we all have when we're kind of going from, Nancy 1.0 to Nancy 2.0, right? Okay, we're going from our old selves to our new selves. And the idea is when we're in these transition periods, we're way more open to trying something new, trying a new product, taking on a new initiative, switching vendors, right? Because we feel that we're in this transition period. We've got a fresh start, right? We're closing the door on who we used to be, Nancy 1.0 with everything she failed to accomplish, all the mistakes she made, all the things that, she wished she did but didn't, right? And now I'm opening the door on Nancy 2.0, and it's a blank slate in front of me. It's a fresh start. And as a result, I feel like I'm going to accomplish what I want to accomplish, right? I feel empowered. I feel emboldened. I feel optimistic, right? And so as a result, I'm more likely to take things on because I think this is the year I'm going to make it, right? And I said year because one of the most, I guess, obvious examples would be New Year's Day, right? That's when it's like all my New Year's resolutions, right? All my new resolutions are going to be on New Year's Day. You don't say I'm going to do it, in the middle of the year. No, you say I'm going to do it at the beginning of the year. But it turns out that the fresh start effect, they're also known as temporal landmarks. There's quite a few of them, and some of them are more universal and some of them are more personal. So the beginning of the year is a very universal one, but so is the beginning of the term if you're in education, or the beginning of the quarter if you're in business, right? So is the beginning of the season, the beginning of the month, and the beginning of the week. So every Monday represents a fresh start, right? Maybe I didn't get it done last week, but this week I'm going to get it done, right? So that has implications for when we send our messages, for when salespeople approach prospects, for when we try to, nail down deals, because these fresh start effects, these temporal landmarks can be very influential. And then some of them are personal. Your birthday, your anniversary, the day you got promoted, the day that you take a new job, maybe when you buy a new home, when you start a family, when you change cities, right? These are all opportunities for a fresh start because you're going through this transition. You're kind of in that I'm no longer, who I used to be or where I used to be, and I'm now morphing into this new place or this new person. So that's when people are most open to making a change. So I think there's definitely a parallel between this idea of temporal landmarks, also known as the fresh start effect, and what you're describing as these liminal spaces. Was that it?
Liminal spaces,
Yeah.
yes. I'm going to get you to read some creepy pastas here, Nancy.
I try to kind of bring it into, out of the hallway and into the business world for the listeners, but I think there's a parallel there. I really do. You're onto something.
I had an image as you were talking with a brand new year. You come out of the hotel room just long enough to sign up for the gym membership and go back into the hotel room. Like,
Yeah,
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 yeah. So have we all, right?
yeah. Oh, right. They say that the gyms they're so crowded in the first couple of weeks of January, and if you go like in February or March, it's like deserted already.
Yeah, you get the real New Year discount.
I'd love to circle back to the pricing conversation we were having just a moment ago because we were talking
Sure, yeah.
about the decoy prices and all. And I thought of another tactic that might be interesting for your listeners, right? So we were talking about, you've got your basic and your deluxe, and then they came up with the decoy, which was kind of the combo of the two, which was the same price as just more expensive one. And people are, but if you say you have two products and what you're trying to do is get people to buy more of that upgraded or premium product, right? You've got your basic, you got your deluxe, and you want to sell more of the deluxe. There's something behavioral scientists talk about called differential price framing. And so what they found is if you're trying to sell more of the premium product, what you don't want to do is say, well, here's the total price of our basic product and here's the total price of our deluxe product. What you want to do is you want to say, here's the total price of our basic product, and for only X dollars more, you can have the premium. So you don't talk about the full cost, you talk about the differential in pricing, right? The incremental price. And researchers ran an experiment. I think they were selling the New York Times. And so they had two different conditions. So in the first condition, it was like, you can have the app and online for $9.99, or for $16.99, you could have the app and online and the print and the crossword and the podcast, like everything. But then they tried a different way. They said, okay, for $9.99, you can have app and online, or for an extra $7, you can have all of it, the app and online and the print and the podcast and the crossword, right? And what they found was they sold twice as many of the premium all-in subscriptions when they just said $7 more. And I mean, $9.99 and $7 gets you to $16.99. So the pricing didn't change, and all of the things involved didn't change. It was the same product, but how they talked about the two prices, instead of it being $16.99, it was simply just $7 more, got them twice as many, sales. And I think that could be, super helpful to anyone in business who's, trying to increase the number of people who go for their premium package or their deluxe product or their high-end option.
Absolutely. That reminds me of, I'm forgetting the technical term for it in direct response marketing, but I've certainly bought a lot of courses because of this strategy, which is like, oh, this is, I don't know, $200 to get into this course. That's less than a cup of coffee per day. They add it up. I forget what the breakdown name for that is, but it reminds me of that. Because if you are just saying like this is the price difference, you are also already assuming that they're going to buy one of the two things, right? Like, well, you're already buying, you might as well just buy this thing. It's only an extra $30. So it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty incredible. It's like, is it rational? No, because the price is the price. It hasn't changed. And if you didn't think you had, the ability to spend $16.99, why do you think you have the ability to spend $7 more than the base? But yet, it's how we make decisions. So always good to know. Like I said, we're going to work.
Well, I think my sister ended up buying this like $700 smart mirror that has like all this like crazy gadgetry to it from something similar to this. Like she was looking for like a really nice mirror, and the people selling it like also got this smart mirror for just like this amount, and she's like never turned it on. It just hangs on her wall like a normal mirror because you have to plug it in to get all the like crazy kind of like a smartphone on your wall stuff. But she just uses it like a normal mirror, and it's like 3x the price of a normal mirror.
That's tough. Yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
and
classic.
it's probably a good time now to say, it bears mentioning that is business people, entrepreneurs, marketers, we're talking about the decision-making shortcuts people use. We, as the business people, the entrepreneurs, the marketers, should use these techniques ethically and responsibly and
Oh,
not
absolutely.
to, to
To
really,
be fair, to the person selling my sister the mirror, like I'm sure they assumed she was going to use it all. My sister was super excited about it, but she like fell back out of it or whatever,
yeah,
back into her old habits, right?
it happens.
Yeah, yeah. Like for the way I have friends in the direct response world that they say some like stuff I feel uncomfortable with. Like the way I always talk about marketing is like marketing can only make the promise that your operations can actually fulfill on, like actually keep that promise. And I always say ideally marketing should make a worse promise than what you can actually do for someone. So that when they do buy something, they're like even more blown away, right? Like that tends to be the winning strategy in my view for sustainability.
Yeah, no, it's kinda like the surprise and delight, you promise one thing and you
Right.
over
Yeah.
deliver, right? And it's like, awesome, And yeah, sure, I mean, you can talk to someone and say, "Hey, if you had this thing that also had these features, would that be of interest to you? Would you use it?" "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah," and so you buy it, and then what happens is you kind of drop into your old routine and you don't, but you plan to
Right,
use it, you
right.
thought you would use it, and therefore you bought it, and then, it's hard to change behavior, even your own, You
It is.
just bought this new thing, and you were excited about it, and now it's like, still doing things the old way.
Well, we got to move into AI here, Nancy, because I think I'm friends with a lot of marketers. You're most likely friends with a lot of marketers too. So you and I are probably in a similar situation, I assume, where a lot of our friends are now ChatGPT rappers on LinkedIn and Facebook. So talk to me about how AI is transforming this whole thing, both the good and the bad. I see there's a lot of stuff I really love about AI. There's a lot of stuff I dislike. Like a lot of my friends who I used to get a lot of business insight from now. Like I said, they kind of feel like they just plugged in their OpenAI API into their content matrix at this point, and they all start sounding very much the same to me. So, I'm very curious with all the work you're doing, what you think the effect of mass AI adoption is doing to this whole world of marketing.
Yes, I mean, speaking of a period of disequilibrium, I mean, that's, I think, what we're going through now, right? I mean, there's every time you turn around, the things are changing, and so, yes, there's a lot going on, and there's from my perspective, there's definitely some good, and there's definitely some maybe not as good, but who knows where it's all gonna shake out, but for now, I think one of the big advantages of AI is access to information and being able to distill that information. So if you have, data that you need kind of crunched and summarized, the amount of time it would take you to do it the old way versus employing AI, I mean, you're ahead of the game in terms of efficiency and time saving. So going through a lot of information, accessing information, sourcing information, also very helpful. I've been reading about this. I haven't tried it yet, but there are some companies now that are creating essentially virtual focus groups. Like they're creating kind of replicas or personas of people, but they're digital. They don't really exist, but they're designed to react the way a person would. So instead of spending all the money you would have to spend on a focus group, either a physical one or an online one, you can have these kind of digital stand ins for your customers and you can run new product ideas, pricing ideas, marketing ideas by them. And in theory, get a pretty good sense of how your customers would actually respond. I was at South by Southwest last month and I was listening to someone talk about it and I want to say it was like a over 80% kind of accuracy rate, which I thought was, pretty interesting. So, it would be a fraction of the cost. So I think there are a lot of wonderful things happening in terms of speed and efficiency and economy that, that certainly we can't ignore. On the flip side of it, from a creation perspective, and that's where my heart is because I started life as a copywriter. I'm a creative director now, so generating content, generating marketing messages, I worry when I hear people say, I don't need to hire people. I'll just have chat do it. Or I'll just have Claude do it. And the ones in the know are like, oh, Claude is actually better with language. I'm going to have Claude do it. And it's still, it's still AI. And, so much of what motivates people and moves them and influences their behavior is human. And there's a lot of times people will describe, AI generated copy as soulless. And I think there's
Yeah.
something to that. But, AI is it's a prediction machine and it's going to source what's next and it can be very very good for certain things but you don't necessarily want your message to sound like everybody else's. I mean, maybe you do if you were so horrible at generating your own marketing messages that it would be an upgrade to sound like everyone else's, but in theory you want to sound different. You have stories to tell that only you can tell and those are the stories you should be telling, right? And you have an opportunity to inject emotion and empathy and just there's certain, I think, context and nuances that at least right now, are better left in a human's hands. Now, that's not to say that we can't co create. It's not to say that I can't throw a first draft in front of Claude and say, what changes would you make, or how would you polish this, or put a blog post in front of Claude and say, how would you break this down into 3 mini posts? I mean, there are things that we can do, but anyone who wants to just kind of abdicate the creation role to AI, I worry about. I mean, yes, you'll have something, and on the surface, it'll seem to be fine, but as you start to dig into it, it's not the same, and it's not going to buy you what you need it to buy, in my opinion.
I pretty much 100% agree with you. Yeah, like I think from a data crunching, of course, it can still hallucinate on that too. It's gotten better, but it still can hallucinate. And Claude is the better writer in my view as well. I think for data crunching, dealing with big data, like smart workflows, smart automations versus dumb automations. Like I was using Clay. We've always had an issue at Empire Flippers of finding this certain type of business model because they're hidden behind kind of like a platform storefront. So it's really hard to find that person. But with all the AI tools, now it's become a lot easier because AI can just like go through so many variables and like figure out and associate so well. And that is like genuinely better than what a human could do, in my view. But when it comes to the more creative process, like just today, I spent probably about 2 hours. One of my fellow employees, he wants to start building up the social media presence, which I love. I love like having more people, like not just me, be the face of the company, right? I would love for more people to do that. But as I was helping him through, like I can feel the AI-ness through it. Like it's hard to describe like the cadence, right? As there's like sometimes AI comes out with this like ultra confident but surface deep understanding of how it's saying something, and it's very punchy. Like this isn't just a movement, it's a revolution. These like very surface level literary tools that it seems to rely on over and over again. And that's why I joked when I first started asking this question about us having a lot of friends who are now just chat GPT rappers, because I see so many entrepreneurs just going that route. Like I have a friend, I'm sure you're familiar with HeyGen, where you can like deep fake yourself, right? And I played around with this tool too. I think it's very cool. I think it's interesting. But he has a wonderful YouTube channel, like a really cool YouTube channel. He runs a very successful agency himself, but he replaced himself with a deep fake version of him from HeyGen that has this like NAN workflow that has Claude like writing this stuff and like all these scrapers getting news and aggregating it. Like it's a pretty cool setup. But then you watch it and there's like just no emotion left, no inflection. None of his like very British weird jokes that he would often do because that's not what AI does. It's not him, right? And I was looking through the comments and he told me, like, yeah, like I asked him if it's worth it, right? Because I stopped watching his channel because I don't want to watch just a Claude rapper basically tell me what's going on. And he said, like, look, like half my audience hates it, half my audience doesn't care, but profit is way up since I started doing it. So who am I to argue, right? And like, fair, that's fair enough. And I think different level, like say you were a plumber, right? And you have a plumbing business in Chicago, you don't need Ernest Hemingway to be writing that. Like you don't for your like homepage website, right? Like it's probably very like boilerplate stuff you're putting on there. Your real marketing messaging is all this outbound stuff you're doing to bring into that site for the most part. And I don't think you need like a super Don Draper style creative guy writing that. Like that's fine, right? But on the other end, I think we are underneath a real threat of being, I don't know, the tyranny of our own data, right? Like the focus groups you're talking about. I think that's super cool. But when if that also cuts us off from new discoveries because we're only taking from this repository, right? So these are some of the stuff I'm thinking through. I agree with you, a state of disequilibrium. We're in a very deep liminal space with AI at the moment. So I see both the really good sides and the really bad sides of it. Like I use AI almost every day. But yeah, so those are my general thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, with AI, it's like, I think your points are very well taken. And, your friend who said, hey, listen, half my audience hates it, half of them doesn't care, but, revenue is up, who can argue with that? And I wonder if there'll be like a golden period where that's true. And then it'll start to fall off because people start to get a little bit more discerning, or they're just
Yeah.
like, oh, but I get that, but I could get that over here for even, less amount of money or less amount of time, or what, like if there's like going to be a peak and then it's going to drop off. I have no idea, but I'm just wondering if people are going to get a little bit savvier and their taste is going to change, or if we're going to end up, I don't know, AIs marketing to AIs, and the human completely comes out of it. Who knows? I did read some interesting research that said that when an AI is sourcing information, it prefers other AI generated information to human generated information. And it's funny because now we're all about, make sure yours sounds like it's a human, but as we continue to advance, I don't know. It's a brave new world, I guess, who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Like the tyranny of your own data. Like an Empire Flippers example would be like, hey, we got a comment on the YouTube channel a few days ago that I just responded to. The guy wants more than just Amazon FBA businesses, which is a primary model that we sell. It's like, why do you always have this? And if you just look at our data, right? Say, oh, Amazon FBA is your highest profitable thing. Like, yeah, but we sell other stuff. And like, just because that's the most profitable thing, we shouldn't be enslaved to this data to not go out and do this over here. So one of my fears is like we might reach this part where AI is just now processing the other AIs, slop for lack of a better word, and then we get into this weird rut where nothing new is being created. And like I think AI companies are already having to create like synthetic data to start training their LLMs in like new ways because they've just absorbed so much of the internet. So it's a very curious time. I think we're probably near the peak of what you were saying, I think, because it's so new. So first mover advantage, right? But I know personally for me, my tastes have changed now. Like when I use Google, for example, I usually just whatever my keyword is, I'll put Reddit at the end. But then it's changed even when I'm on Reddit, because if I see like a super juicy post, like in digital marketing or cold email or whatever, like I used to, I just sit down and read it. Like, can't wait to like see what this guy has to say. But now I scroll down like way beneath this like super long post to read the comments to see if anyone's calling it AI first.
That's so smart though, I mean, yeah. It's like it's a way to kind of, filter out what you don't want as opposed to being, kind of pulled in from the get-go going, "Oh, I'm gonna love this," and then it's like, you
Right.
probably through and you're like, "Yeah, not so good."
Right. Like, yeah, like every now and then I still fall for it. I see the like ChatGPT or Claude AIism or see the dreaded M dash, like, oh, I'm tricked again. I got me that time. What are you seeing from a behavioral marketing? Like, what's your theory on how all this different AI stuff is going to roll out, how this might change, marketing and like just human behavior, how we market to humans?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are a few different ways to answer that, I think. I mean, certainly everyone's talking about it. And so that makes people interested. If everyone else is doing it, maybe I should do it too. So there's the social proof thing, there's a novelty thing. We're all drawn to things that are new and novel. There's the idea of anthropomorphizing things like people are, I mean, what Claude is even has a name, but it's like, oh, he told me this, or he said this, or he recommends this, and there's some research out there that's showing that, people just aren't going deep anymore. They will take the first thing, it's just because it's so easy. It's so easy. I'm going to pop this into chat, I'm going to get my answer and I'm not going to look any further and I'm going to accept it as gospel truth and I'm going to make my decision based on it. So people aren't being particularly discerning. They're kind of offloading that to AI. But if they find out that the data they were given was wrong, they're holding AI to a higher standard, right? They would be more willing to forgive a human who makes a mistake than they would be to forgive the AI because we feel that the AI should be infallible. And it's not, at least not now, not yet, I was trying to find something recently. I had seen this great video. It was a company that was putting out a safety product for fleet managers. So if you're someone who ran a trucking company, you had all these different truckers working for you, and you wanted to make sure that these truckers were, following the rules of the road and were being courteous drivers and everything, you could buy this company's product. And I had seen this video and it was really interesting. It started out with this like naturalist. He's, out in the woods and, he's like, oh, I'm stalking this rare bird. Sometimes can be spotted here, but you don't see it very often anymore. So you're like just pulled in on this whole thing. Like, all right, this person is out there, and then it's like, oh, here comes one. I see it. And it's some driver going by, flipping off another driver, right? Flip the bird kind of, right? So that's the bird that they were looking for, and I thought for a B2B company, this was, pretty daring. You just don't usually see it, It really made an impression. But I saw it. I was, it's really cool. And then time passed and I wanted to find it again. I wanted to reference it in something. Could not remember who it was. So I pop onto chat, describe it in detail, right? And lo and behold, I get an answer. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is great. And they tell me it's OnStar. And I know it's not OnStar. I absolutely know it's not OnStar. but they serve up the video, right? Or it serves up the video, right? And I'm like, oh my God, this is great. At least I've got the video now, you know? And in the video, they have the company's name and the name of the product. So now I'm a little incensed, right? So I go back to chat and I'm like, hey, listen, it's not OnStar, you know, isn't it really blah, 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 blah. You know, I can't remember the name of it, but I know now what it is, you know, because that's what's in the video. Yes, you're absolutely right. Sorry about that. So I'm like, well, why did you tell me it was OnStar then? You know, well, you know, yes, you're absolutely right. But, you know, the most likely prediction was that it was, that's what, you know, chat told me. The most likely prediction was it would have been OnStar because they kind of own that space. And, you know, but I'm like, you're showing me the video, which has a different name on it. And yet you're telling me, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, now, of course, now it's pleasing me. You're so smart, Nancy. You're so smart, Nancy, you know, but
The psychomantic, yeah.
it's like sometimes you almost have to know the answer or at least, you know, interrogate the answer enough so that you can be confident that what you're getting is what you really want, you know? I don't know. Crazy, crazy.
That just so not as bad as that, but something similar to that happened to me just yesterday, actually. So sometimes when I'm watching like really good in-depth like marketing YouTube videos, I'll just not like throw the link into GenSpark is what I use, but I use a bunch of different AIs with it. Just like, hey, tell me like the step by step of what this guy is talking about. And it named the chat after this other marketer who I'm actually friends with, who has nothing to do with this marketer. So it just like predicted, oh, this must be this guy, when it's like clearly not. Like I even fed the link where it's like not that guy, but I named the chat after my other friend, which I thought was very funny. I thought that happened to him too. But then another thing that is, this is a cool little tactic. You might not know this one. Maybe I'll be able to give you a cool tip. So my background is SEO, right? So I'm good friends with Tim Solo, who's the CMO over at Ahrefs. Awesome search engine company. Not sponsoring this podcast, but they definitely should. But him and I were chatting, and ChatGPT and Claude started giving back like the index of a website or like all these links around a topic. And there's a huge portion of the links it gives that lead to nowhere. So they're like, oh, nancyharhut.com slash Greg sells your business. It'll like give that as a domain, but you don't actually have that URL at all. But it keeps thinking that's a URL. So now Tim over at Ahrefs is like harvesting all these fake Ahrefs URLs that ChatGPT is hallucinating and actually building content around that thing. It's like, well, it's already hallucinating. Let's like at least make sure the link works. So that's a little funny traffic tip with LLMs.
That is funny. That's what's all right. It exists and the, you know, AI is recommending it. I better populate it. I better build it out. That is funny. Wow.
Building traffic through ChatGPT's dementia. Yeah. Well, gosh, it's almost an hour already. But before we start moving to like kind of the wrap up, there's this thing Lauren, my content producer, put into these questions, which is the von Restorff effect. So, which is kind of related to what we're talking about, I think. As AI comes more online, like you and I were tech savvy, so we're kind of at the bleeding edge of this stuff. Like my dad still uses yellow pages, right? But this is going to become so much more mainstream. So to stand out in this even more crowded marketplace, maybe we can talk a little bit about what this von Restorff effect is and any parting advice you have for people standing out in this marketplace.
Sure. So the von Restorff effect is this idea that the way the human brain works, we notice and remember things that are different from their surroundings. And, you know, again, it goes back to our ancient ancestors. If you got up in the morning, you popped your head out of the cave, you scanned the horizon, if everything looked the way it did the day before, that was good, right? You know, but if something were different, if there was something that had been added to the horizon or was missing from the horizon, that could be a warning sign. It could pose a threat. And in those days, it could be a very real life or death threat. And as a result, all these years later, humans are hardwired to notice things that are different from their surroundings. So, what does that mean? You know, it means, for example, when you're sending out an email, if you use a character from the keyboard that is neither a letter or a number, so maybe a slash, maybe an asterisk, maybe a dollar sign or a number sign, you get an 11% lift in opening rates just because it's different, right? You're scanning your inbox and everything is letters, letters, letters. And then all of a sudden there's this thing that's not a letter. And so you have a tendency to notice it, right? We notice things that are different from their surroundings and, you know, more likely to engage and to recall. So it's things like that. So that's an example for a subject line. The same thing, I think if you use a number to start your subject line, you get a lift. If you start with an emoji, you get a lift. Now, that only holds until a lot of people start doing the same thing. And once, you know, a lot of different marketers are starting with emojis or starting with numbers, then, you know, you're going to kind of just fade into the masses. You're not going to look different. You're going to look like everyone else, you know? So that's a simple example with email subject lines, but anything we can do to our messaging, to our brand personas, to our color schemes, to differentiate ourselves from the competition, to stand out is going to work in our favor. And again, if AI is a prediction machine and if AI is going after what's already, or serving up, I should say, what's already been done before, you're less likely to be able to take advantage of the von Restorff effect because it's not going to serve up something that hasn't already been done before, essentially. So your ability to harness that effect, to stand out and get remembered, is diminished if you're just outsourcing everything without the human intervention.
That makes total sense. And the emoji thing, that was a great trick. But now with AI, loves emojis. So this is like one of the perfect example of what you're discussing. Funny enough, this kind of goes in track with that. I saw this thing again on Reddit. I scrolled down to make sure it wasn't AI. It was AI. But they used this trick that was very smart. It was clever of them to try to make it look less like AI, which was the undercapitalization effect. So basically, they never capitalized any words. The start of a sentence, a title, a subheader, anything. They didn't capitalize anything. And that tricks people because like, oh, AI is like much more prim and proper or whatever, right? So this must be like, actual human because it's like fast and loose. Like they even add in some punctuation errors or something like that. But now people are like looking because they're getting used to the cadence of AI and like how it looks like with that's just like completely unfiltered AI. They're looking for those like little ticks. So people are doing these like little tricks where they just don't capitalize anything, which fits, I think, with the effect.
Yeah, misspell. I mean, I was speaking at a conference, I think about a year ago, and I was talking about the effect of surprise, right? And when you surprise people, it focuses their attention and it makes them more likely to remember the thing that surprised them. And I was saying one way to surprise people is to use the wrong word or to misspell a word because, we notice it. We're like, oh, they use the word sale, but they have five A's in it, SAAAAAL, or there was an example I found, it was, I think, from Sears, and it said it's been a lawn winter, LAWN, lawn, as opposed to a long winter, which is the expression. But then it was, the Sears example, they were selling patio furniture. So, oh, right, lawn furniture, that makes sense, but you
Yeah.
double take, because you think, oh, they've made a mistake and, let me see what this is. But it's a similar thing now with AI. It's like people are deliberately misspelling something or, disregarding conventional grammar and composition rules just to try to say, hey, I'm human, it's not an AI. I mourn the loss of the M dash. I liked M dash, and now it's like you're afraid to use them because it's a red flag that it's AI generated content. I don't know if you are familiar with Ann Handley. She's the chief content
Mm.
officer of Marketing Profs, and she wrote a book
Oh
called
yeah, 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 yeah. I don't know her personally, but I'm familiar. Yeah.
she actually for a while had a little pop-up online store where she was selling t-shirts that said justice for the M dash. As a writer, she too feels wronged by this idea that we can no longer use them.
So I'm a writer. I write fiction and poetry as well as doing the copywriting stuff. But I remember my literature teacher, great guy. He would always correct me on my grammar. Like, damn, I like write a lot. I asked him like, do writers like just do they study grammar? Is that how they get so good at this and like learn all these like weird literary things that you're teaching us? He's like, no, their grammar is usually pretty bad. It's usually their editors that are good at grammar. Because the writer's just like all over the place, the creative madman. So I never used the M dash because I am a poor grammar kind of guy. But I was reviewing something my CEO wrote on this like intake form. And he was asking for my advice, right? So I looked at the intake form and I started like putting in some case studies, and then I noticed this bit like, damn, this guy. Like I've never met a person who really uses the M dash. So I asked him, like, "Do you really use the M dash? Are you the reason why ChatGPT loves the M dash?" And he's like, "No, this is really my ChatGPT." Like, of course.
Oh,
But
man.
yeah, so I only know a very select few people that were a part of the elite M dash club.
Well, I mean, there had to be some of us because that's what, the
For
language model
sure.
was trained on, right? So
Right, right.
we only have ourselves to blame, I guess.
Well, Nancy, this has been such a pleasure. I didn't get through half of my questions, like I told you. For the audience listening in, we always send a guest our questions. Then I destroy their confidence in that that's the questions I'm going to be asking because I know I'm just going to go on a tangent with the guests. But Nancy, it's awesome chatting with you. Is there anything you would like us to promote? Anything that you think would help our audience? Anything you want us to get the word out about?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much. I really enjoyed our conversation. It's been great. If people want to know more about, behavioral science and some of these proven tips and tricks and tactics that help you work with the brain as opposed to against it, I would recommend my book, Using Behavioral Science in Marketing. It's 288 pages, 17 chapters, and 25 plus actually proven practical, easy to apply ways to create marketing messages and strategies that are more brain friendly, that work with the brain, and as a result, increase sales and loyalty. So definitely recommend using behavioral science in marketing. And should anyone need any marketing help, I co-founded HBT Marketing. We're an agency that blends marketing best practices and behavioral science for people's email campaigns, social campaigns, direct mail, landing pages. So, and then check me out on LinkedIn. You can certainly find me there. So it'd be great to hear from some of your listeners.
Yeah, well, hopefully some of them actually hit you up because I think a lot of what we talked about, like the strategies at the beginning, these are when you think about it, like, oh, that makes sense. But there's so much of it that we just is like going native in our brain where we can't, like, we don't see like that's the thing. But if you're able to bring it out into your marketing, it's so powerful. Like just these little tiny things, they stack on each other. So all my friends listening in, especially if you want to sell your business with me one day, you should probably hire Nancy to get your profit up so you can sell for an even bigger, a bigger price, right? I would love to get with you someday to, like, I don't know if there's been any study on this, but I'm just curious myself. Maybe you already know, but like when an entrepreneur builds up their business and they decide to sell their business, there's like signals you can look for, right? There's like, I'm getting older, I want to retire, or maybe I'm burnt out, I want to do this other thing now. Like I have a friend, he's selling a, probably a $6 million agency. He's just tired of agency life. He wants to go do a new thing. I'm curious if there's any like studies around that, like in terms of the entrepreneurial behavioral psychology that goes into them deciding to exit, because this is a very big decision, right? It's definitely like moving from a stage 2 to a stage 3 in terms of what you're doing with your life. Have you ever looked into stuff like that?
I haven't. I don't have any research or any data. The one thing I have to offer is it would seem to me that something called the endowment effect would kick in, which is this idea that we overvalue things that are ours. So someone who's
Some of
built
us
a
tend to do that.
business, right? It's like it's the same thing with your house. If you're going to sell your house because you're moving to a new location or something, the real estate agent runs the comps. They figure out what comparable properties in your area, your square footage, your condition, what they're selling for, and they say, okay, based on that data, here's what we're going to put your house on the market for. And what do? You're like, no, 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 it should be higher. It should be higher. Why? Because it's your house.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that in your world where, people are selling their businesses, some of that might, impact people's expectations, owners' expectations.
You were speaking to the absolute choir in my day to day life. I had a guy, it can go really insane. It depends on the type of entrepreneur they are. The worst are the people who create software. They're not worse people, they're great people, but their expectations are like out of this world because they're fed all these like Silicon Valley style exits. So, my favorite one, this happened 3 or 4 months ago. This guy reaches out to me. He's like, hey, I want to sell my SaaS for like $15 million next year. Like, okay, great, like we definitely have buyers for that. Like tell me more, like how much is it making right now, like what's the trailing 12 months, like all the normal M&A questions, right? And he's like, yeah, we're at like 15,000 MRR right now, like $15,000 profit. He's like, no, revenue, but we're going to be doubling by this time next year. Like, I think your evaluation math is very, very wrong in terms of what you're trying to do in terms of your exit next year, right? But he was genuinely surprised. He's like, I thought this is how this is done. Like, no, man. Like these companies you're talking about are valued on like market share for a reason because it's just like they're too big to ignore, right? But
Yeah.
you're not that. You're going to be valued on profit most likely, right? They're like, you are. These are totally two different ball games. But yeah, so I deal with this all the time. I always joke with my entrepreneur friends, I'm here to break your dreams so I can help you wake up and actually become rich. Like get the Silicon Valley stuff out of your mind. Now let me go help you make $1 million by exiting your business, right? So yeah, thank you for speaking to the choir.
Sure, sure. We're human beings. We're not always rational. Most of the times we're not. So
Well, Nancy, we're going to have you come back on a third time. Maybe once I finish your book, we can go through like a whole list of something. It's just always a pleasure to talk to you. But yeah, we'll put your book down in the show notes as well as your LinkedIn and, of course, your marketing agency. So, Nancy, thank you again for returning to the podcast. It was a pleasure.
the pleasure was all mine. Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
There you have it. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it got you inspired at all the different things that are happening in this industry. And of course, if you just want to buy a highly profitable business, you can always go to empireflippers.com/marketplace, or maybe you want to make an exit of your highly profitable business, and you could go to empireflippers.com/sell your site. I've been your host, Greg. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave a review, give us a like, a follow, share it across social media. Talk to you all soon. See you on the next episode.